Hey there guys, welcome back as we kickstart the Eden campaign. Now I will only be playing this on normal, and this game is relatively slow moving, though you can kick up the game speed to be much more similar to today's RTSs. The controls are awkward to say the least. There are hotkeys, but they're built-in specific in such a way that it's just extremely awkward to deal with. So what we'll be doing is just normal mode with the normal speed, because it has been a while since I've played this game, and all the different difficulty levels they don't change the AI at all. It changes the objectives that you have. They start adding in more and more objectives, and normal is something I can handle. Hard not so much, especially with how much stuff you have to do in the hard mode missions. Let's go ahead and kick it off. See, the videos you just don't see.
Among the remaining
anything.
colonists of Eden, there is rumor, uneasiness, and fear.
So the basic story, I'm not even going to worry about having that video play, even though it's a decent one that kind of explains the situation. This game does take place after Outpost 1, surprise, surprise, which was a turn-based strategy game where you just tried to develop a colony. Now we actually introduce combat and stuff, and a lot of the features that were going to be in Outpost 1 have been brought into Outpost 2. The story goes is that after you build your colony in Outpost 1, you start getting different factions. And, well, another faction. You have Eden and Plymouth. Eden believes in taming the world and terraforming it to its own ends. And Plymouth, not so much. They want to change humans to be able to live in this barren world, and that creates the friction. Now Eden is responsible for the storyline. They are trying to create a terraforming tool that ends up becoming something known as the Blight, which turns organic matter to goo and just destroys technology. Though you have these types of computers that are half organic, half synthetic, that they take over, and the Blight can actually use. Though that's not as big a story point in this particular game. So your whole quest is to just get away from the Blight and try to get off the planet. Now as Plymouth, it's the opposite. It's oh my god, what's going on? We gotta get out of here. So we'll go ahead and read through the very first novella here. Chapter 1. Conspiracy. Take a drink, go fast. All right. Both wheels of the scooter left the ground as Axon sailed over the lip of the down ramp and into the tunnel that connected the hot lab with the rest of Eden Colony. He touched down a third of the way along the ramp, the tires landing with a satisfying chirp that echoed off the metal-lined walls, motors whining in protest. He was breaking half a dozen safety regulations, driving like a teenager a third his biological age of 45. He didn't care. First of all, he was mad, damn it, and it felt good to break a few regs. And second of all, nobody was around to complain. The tunnels were almost deserted. Every adult who wasn't engaged in a service vital to the maintenance of the colony was at Ewan's town meeting. The meeting Axe and Moon had just walked out of. He flew past a huge set of pressure doors, startling a workman who was inspecting the utility conduits that lined the wall like rows of fat sausages. He squealed the scooter around a right-angled turn and up the tunnel towards his resident unit. He slowed slightly as he passed a group of children and their teacher bot strolling down the ramp from the nursery, then twisted the throttle hard twisted his throttle hard to scream up the last bit of tunnel. Oh my gosh. He hit the base of the ramp with a bump, started braking halfway up, and slid to a stop just short of the open airlock doors. He nosed the scooter into the charging station next to a row of identical vehicles and plucked his key card, with its hacked safety overrides, from the slot in the handlebar. He palmed the card and glanced out through the train station's observation port. The sun was setting outside. exaggerating the hard, reddish tones of New Terra's landscapes. The buildings of Eden spread out before him like a cluster of silver toadstools. In the distance, he could see the farthest of the lab structures, nicknamed the Hot Lab, where the meeting would still be going on. Nguyen was a fool. He'd known that. He simply hadn't known how much of a fool until now. He rubbed the keycard between his fingers. The main lock into the Hot Lab was the one door in Eden it wouldn't open. Axon Moon wasn't a man who liked anything close to him. He wasn't a man who was used to it. He strolled through the safety lock. Its open doors ready to spring shut at any sign of emergency. New Terra's thin atmosphere would kill a human in less than 2 minutes. It was something you were either eternally aware of, or you were dead. The common area, with its lounging chairs, planter islands, and multi-tainment consoles, was deserted, as he'd hoped. He was about to break a law much more severe than a scooter speed limit, the one law that carried a death penalty. And he didn't want any potential witnesses around. He waved the key in front of the door to his private quarters and stepped quickly inside. "Good evening, Axon." The voice was cool, female, with a slight accent that all Savant series computers shared. The computer itself, a glossy black cube a little less than a meter on a side, was recessed into a console on the inside corner of the room. A window on the computer's otherwise featureless surface displayed a moving, transparent gearworks like a clock made of glass. This was Kraft's identity icon, its face, in a way, as familiar to Axon as his own. It was as much a roommate as any appliance. The Savants were the most sophisticated computers ever made, almost human in many ways, undoubtedly superior in others. "Good evening, Kraft. Verify security?" "We are secure. Code word, collusion." He nodded, the gesture doubtless detected by one of the Savant's many eyes hidden around the room. He sat down on one of the room's 2 chairs. He had what were considered luxury quarters by Eden standards, but the room was only 2 meters by 3, and would have been smaller yet if he hadn't been allowed a little extra space for Savant Kraft. Except for a few of the most advanced researchers in the lab, only a handful of surviving elders, such as himself, were allowed their own savants. He and Kraft had been together since he'd emerged from cold sleep on the starship 10 years out from New Terra. He'd been just a child then, with only dim memories of Earth, open skies, and plants that didn't grow in a hydroponics vat. He sometimes wished those memories meant more to him. Eden was home now, for better or worse. Earth was dead and nearly forgotten. He sighed. "Kraft, open a stealth back channel to Savant Frost. I need to talk with Emma." There. He'd done it. Initiated a clandestine communication with the rogue Plymouth colony, an act of treason that could get him kicked out of the nearest airlock. "One moment. Emma is in her quarters. Frost confirms that she is secure. Opening voice. Open visual. Confirm?" Kraft sounded incredulous, if that were possible for a computer. Savants weren't supposed to have emotions, but there were those who had their doubts. Certainly, Kraft had the justification. Visual communications would take 100 times the bandwidth of voice only, with a correspondingly increased chance that their link, bootlegged on the subcarrier of a satellite control signal, would be detected. Confirmed. I want picture. One face of the Savant's cube brightened into a display. Routing it through the internal network to the room's intercom screen would have been less secure. Emma's thin, high cheekboned face turned towards him. Her blonde hair, streaked with gray, was piled on top of her head and held in place with a couple of writing styluses poked through the bun. It had been years since he'd seen her face. Sometimes he still missed her. This was one of those times. She looked into the camera, her eyes wide with surprise. Axon, are you crazy? You need to see my face, Emma, to know I'm serious. This is worth the risk. Her brows wrinkled in concern, and she sat down. Behind her, he could see her quarters, if anything, smaller than his own, and as always, a disorderly heap of clothing, rock samples, and scientific equipment. What's wrong? You're not the joking kind, Axon. It's Nguyen. I told you he'd slammed the lid down on one of the labs 3 years ago. We'd assumed he was working on a biotech for terraforming. He resisted all my efforts, legitimate and clandestine, to get inside. His scientists are all handpicked, and not about to talk. And today he threw the lid open, held a town meeting to show off his secrets. He was working on terraforming, but that's only a small part of it. He's also been mining the encrypted data files from the starship, the ones on military technology. He heard an almost imperceptible gasp from Emma. The founders on Earth had been reluctant to throw away any science, but they'd also hoped that the New World could avoid some of Earth's worst mistakes. Thus, certain information had been encrypted with the desire that it remain that way until the new civilization was ready for it. How bad is it? He has high-energy weapons, lasers of some kind, I think. He was hardly forthcoming with technical details, though he was all too happy to blast a hole through a piece of hull metal as demonstration. There may already be fixed installations on the new security posts, and he was working on adapting them to a turret on one of the mobile units. Maybe he has them operational already. I wouldn't put it past Nguyen to feed us misinformation. She smiled lightly. As though you and I didn't know a thing or two about misinformation. Where did we go wrong, Axon? He leaned his head down and rubbed his brow, unable to face her. This had been his idea initially. You saw the computer projections. All elders did. 2 independent colonies had a much greater probability of survival than one. We could have told the people, not and have the colonies be truly independent. Creating a political rift seemed like the best way. And now you see where it brought us? He sighed and leaned back in his chair. You can see for yourself the different paths Eden and Plymouth have followed. The split might have happened anyway, given enough time. It's human nature to cluster into like groups. It's human nature for groups to go to war, too. We should have seen it coming. There isn't a war yet, Emma. Plymouth doesn't even have weapons. They will when they find out. They'll be forced into it. How will they find out? She frowned, and a bit of the old fire flashed in her eyes. I'll tell them, Axon, if I have to. Of course, there are probably already less direct ways. There always are. He didn't agree, but he couldn't argue. He'd do the same thing if he were in her place. Why else had he contacted her? Besides, she continued, if they start on terraforming without our consent, they'd have to be a reaction in some kind. It goes against the principle that Plymouth was founded on, of living in harmony with New Terra rather than trying to make it into some kind of Urzet's Earth. He cleared his throat and squirmed in his seat. Emma, from what I saw this afternoon, I'm pretty sure they've already started. Some kind of atmosphere-building microorganism injected into the bedrock. Just test wells so far, but... What? What the frag do you people think you're doing? He sighed. They hardly consulted me, Emma. You know that I think any such drastic step has to be by consensus, which is a little hard to do when the colonies aren't even talking to each other. He could feel old wounds opening, feel them falling into the pit of their own differences, as powerful as the attraction that had once brought them together. It was your people who shut down the communication satellite. We don't have the technology to talk even if we wanted to. It was an accident. The council just wanted to make a dramatic gesture. They had no idea that the satellite couldn't be turned back on. Besides, there's still our back channel through the weather satellite telemetry links. It's enough to open some dialogue between our leaders. It's too late for that. I've been trying to talk sense to Nguyen for years, face to face. What chance does some voice out of a box have? Her look turned deadly serious. Then it might be time to take Nguyen out of the picture, Axon. He felt the hair stand up on the back of his neck. Emma had a ruthless side that he forgot sometimes. What are you suggesting? Doing what we've always done, Axon. What's necessary for the survival of the human race. He shook his head. No, I can't do that, Emma. We're the last of the elders, Axon. The last colonists born on old Earth. It's a dangerous world, even as protected as we are. We can't risk one of us dying with the program out of control. He was considering what she said, which is why he happened to be looking out the window as the fireball erupted. The sound came a fraction of a second later, mostly as a rumble in the floor, the air too thin to conduct much noise. Somehow, without realizing it, he was on his feet and standing in front of the window. Maker's name. What? Pleaded Emma's voice. I've lost visual. Axon! Malfunction, said Frost. Major malfunction. I have lost contact with all computers in Lab Structure 4. 20 seconds prior to this, a major cascade failure moved through the structures, all the structure's electronic systems. Emma, the hot lab exploded. I can see flames, so there's a major oxygen leak. It looks like the whole pressure vessel must be ripped open. Frag, half the town was in there. Silence suddenly struck him. The alarms! Kraft, where are the alarms? All automatic alarms attached to Lab 4 have been disabled, per Chairman Nguyen's order. Sound disaster alarms. Dispatch disaster alert response teams. Use my override codes. Even as he was finishing the sensor, he could hear the klaxon sounding from every intercom speaker. Axon, Emma called. What's happening? I can't hear you. The signal's breaking up. Axon ignored her so he could listen to Kraft. Disaster teams will be unable to respond, said Kraft. Emergency tunnel bulkheads and airlocks were closed before the explosion. Open them. I do not have those override codes, and the doors have been locked. By whom? The doors are locked from inside. Axon! What? Emma's voice was cut off. We have lost the link to Plymouth. There is an incoming communications. Its origin is the Lab 4 East safety airlock. It was the same lock Axon had walked through only 10 minutes earlier. Perhaps some had gotten inside and sealed it before the building had completely depressurized. On screen. The big intercom screen on the far wall came to light. He recognized Lil Komos, one of Nguyen's scientists, one of the most friendly to Axon's viewpoints. There were several times he had thought she might agree to be a mole inside Nguyen's operations, but it never happened. He could tell before she spoke that she was terrified. And something else. She didn't look well. Elder, I don't have much time. I'm setting this message to record and repeat. Something went wrong with the test well. I told them the organisms we were using were too dangerous. Lil, are you? She continued, either unable to hear him or unwilling to stop talking. It grows too fast, but Nguyen wasn't willing to wait. An atmosphere in our lifetime, he said. She shook her head as though to clear it. She brushed her hair out of her face, and he could see that she was trembling. Not enough time to explain. Attacks organics, even protein units and biotronics computers, even the plastics in our environmental seals. The background, he noticed for the first time, a slight hissing noise. Evacuate now! Get everyone you can into the evac transports. Salvage what you can, but avoid the affected areas, and don't let anyone out. Get away, and don't come back, she coughed. Her face was white and waxy looking, red veins clearly standing out on her cheeks. Don't try to rescue us or investigate. Get out while you can. Only you have the influence to make it happen, Elder. You and Nguyen is dead. We're all dead. Don't. Her eyes went wide. Her hands came up as though to cover her face. then stopped halfway, shaking. She fell back against the far wall of the airlock, her body shuddering convulsively. The camera lingered on her for almost a minute before there was a click, and the message repeated. Axon cut off the picture with a gesture before he could hear her voice again. He leaned against a chair to steady himself. He had to do what she'd said. There was no choice. He'd seen what was happening to her before the message cut off. She was melting. Alright, and so that sets up our first chapter for Outpost 2 Divided Destiny Eden campaign. I'll see you guys next time as we do our very first mission, which is admittedly extremely short, but I will be pausing and explaining certain things before we actually go through it to make it a slightly longer video and so you get a slightly better idea of what's going on. I'll see you guys next time.